Basically, a test was recently carried out to dim the Earth by changing the nature of clouds to make them reflect more sunlight back into space. I'm not joking. A so-called cloud brightening operation was just carried out on a decommissioned aircraft carrier in San Francisco. And the idea of all this is to help fight alleged global warming by reducing the amount of sunlight that hits the Earth. I wonder what could go wrong with that. Now, look, this is part of a broader program of what's known as solar geoengineering and, of course, just climate geoengineering in general. They want to change the nature of the environment. And programs like this are beginning to gain momentum as a part of a proposed solution, maybe the final solution to climate change. Now, look, stories on these tests, they're starting to hit the big corporate media. The big corporate media is defending it and even promoting it. In fact, New York Times had a big puff piece about the recent tests, although theirs seems to be very much in support of the idea, I should note. And they're promoting the idea, it seems, of dimming the Earth to fight what they claim is climate change. Let me show you. This is New York Times. They say, a little before 9 a.m. on Tuesday, an engineer named Matthew Galilee crouched on the deck of a decommissioned aircraft carrier in San Francisco Bay, pulled on a pair of ear protectors and flipped a switch. A few seconds later, a device resembling a snowmaker began to rumble, then produced a great and deafening hiss. They say that a fine mist of tiny aerosol particles shot from its mouth, traveling hundreds of feet through the air, and they say it was the first outdoor test in the United States of technology designed to brighten clouds and bounce some of the sun's rays back into space, a way of temporarily cooling a planet that is now dangerously overheating. Personally, I don't think the planet is dangerously overheating. I think this is based on false data monitored through sensors that were installed in overly hot places, like, for example, airport runways and so on. You put a sensor out in the scorching sun on like a tarmac, the temperature is going to be a little bit higher than you would elsewhere. And so they use the data on that and they create it in multiple locations. They actually got rid of the sensors and then used computer-generated technology, computer-generated like projections of how hot things will get to just use the same basic trajectory of how hot it's getting to create this estimate, to manufacture this narrative that the world is dangerously overheating. And frankly, I'd say that lying clowns like this, claiming the planet is now dangerously overheating, are leading people to do crazy things, for example, like trying to alter clouds to make it so that less sunlight hits the face of the Earth. But back to what they're saying. They say the scientists wanted to see whether the machine that took years to create could consistently spray the right size of salt aerosols through the open air outside of a lab. In other words, this bypasses some of the problems they're having with this technology. Remember last time we talked about this? Bill Gates, the guy who made Windows. He's not a scientist. He's not a doctor. He's Bill Gates, right? He's not a farmer, even though he's doing all these things. Bill Gates was backing a plan to fly airplanes and to spray aerosols into the stratosphere to alter the nature of the entire stratosphere, to make it so that, again, there's almost like what you'd have during a volcanic eruption, which, by the way, if you look at history, the very one that they reference created plague and famine when it happened to the world because volcanic ash covered the earth, blocked a certain amount of sunlight, the world became cold, we had a mini ice age, and it caused famine and death and plague around the entire world. And they want to artificially create something just like that. But they want to do it to fight climate change, they say. Now, besides that, the problem with the Bill Gates plan is that it requires them to get a bunch of airplanes, strap them with these things, and then fly them up into the air and then spray stuff into the stratosphere, which means they have to fly a bit higher than planes could normally fly, right? It's a bit of a complicated process because of that. The scientists being promoted by New York Times in this piece, though, they're talking about something you could just roll outside, hit a button, and it would just start spraying stuff. And the presumption here is that it would, using aerosols, go into the stratosphere, go into the clouds and so on, and begin altering the clouds. Now they say this, they say if it works, the next stage would be to aim at the heavens and try to change the composition of clouds above the Earth's oceans. Not joking, folks. This is what they're saying. Look, just to make it clear, they're saying that they want to change the composition of clouds in order to brighten them and, quote, bounce some of the sun rays back into space. And they believe, hypothetically, that by doing so, they're going to cool the planet. Now, first of all, this is messing with the very idea of whether the whole thing is real or fake in the first place, whether we're actually facing a crisis, and of course, whether significantly altering the planet in such a way would cause an even more serious crisis, or whether, frankly, it's just some imaginary thing in the first place and they're creating a problem over something that doesn't exist. But look, in other words, what they're doing is they're loading the clouds with aerosols in order to make them more dense, and they're doing this to reduce the temperature of the Earth by trying to make it so that we and plants and everything else on this planet get less sunlight. Now look, I would personally question a lot of things with this. Aside from the overall issue that I personally have with global warming, I believe it's the doomsday theory of an insane political cult. But even beyond that, how would altering the clouds affect rainfall? Have you thought about that? If you make the clouds more dense, what does that mean for clouds doing what they normally do? Collecting, water and then rain, creating rain and so on to keep everything alive on the planet. What would happen if you alter the clouds and it affects rainfall? What would that mean for crops? What would that mean for us? How would this affect plant life, for that matter, even just aside from crops? What about trees and everything else that grows on the green earth, right? What does it mean for us and everything else in this world if everything's just a bit darker? If they make the whole world dark? Well, look, the problem is, even beyond that, it's not just limited to this program. It's not just this crazy scientist thinking he can change the Earth for the better, right? Thinking he can wheel this thing out, hit his switch, and just spray aerosols into the clouds. It's not limited to this. There are many, many programs like this. And all of them, I think, are Dr. Evil level insane. They're all trying to alter the atmosphere in different ways, and each of which I would deem a threat to this world. I would say every one of these things is just as much, if not more so, a threat to the planet as the imagined crisis they're trying to say this is the answer to. And each of these, really, if you take them all the things they're doing, and you compound them with, the next ones and so on, they are creating a man-made threat. They are significantly trying to alter the world right now, and they're building massive facilities and operations that are doing things like this across the board, each one playing their own little role, and I would say they're going to manufacture a disaster if they keep it up. But back to the New York Times piece, right? After they say their prayers about the need to fight global warming and reduce the temperatures of the Earth, they then go on into other programs we've discussed before, like carbon capture. They're building facilities. There's already some in operation. They're building these in different parts of the world, carbon capture facilities. Remember, I did a whole episode on these before, if you want to go back and watch them. But the theory is this: they have these technologies that suck carbon out of the air, right? We breathe out CO2, plants need it to breathe and so on. If you suck it out, you're probably going to kill the plant life, but regardless, they're doing it. They suck that out of the air, they capture it, and they inject it into groundwater. And they say it's safe there, right? Now, these concepts are pretty dang controversial, right? Even by people who otherwise drink the punch, so to speak. And as they note, the Biden administration is funding research on these programs. The Biden administration is, in fact, only recently, in fact, funding research programs on solar geoengineering. And even the ones that are not being currently researched, like carbon capture, they're actually building them. And there's a corrupt business behind it where they sell carbon credits. When companies talk about being net zero, what they really do, they don't technically change their practices. It's not like the oil companies stop selling oil. What they do is they buy carbon credits from these insane, psycho factories, which, claim we captured X amount of carbon, and then they sell the credits of the X amount of carbon they got out of the atmosphere to these private businesses until you reach a level where they say it's net zero, right? They have to buy 1 carbon credit for every piece of carbon that they emit, and that's how they reach net zero. The effect of that is they end up financing this entire subsector of industry, which is, at least in my opinion, risking detrimentally destroying the environment, ironically under the narrative of saving the environment when it comes to things like this. But back to New York Times, there's even noting the Biden administration itself is even trying to distance itself from this concept, solar geoengineering. Even if they support carbon capture, even if they support all these other crazy things, solar geoengineering is kind of the next step of crazy. Too crazy even for some of the really insane radicals who fully buy into this stuff. It's too crazy even for them. But New York Times is promoting it. They note this. They say, universities, foundations, private investors, and the federal government have started to fund a variety of efforts from sucking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to adding iron to the ocean in an effort to store carbon dioxide on the sea floor. I wonder how that's going to affect the world, folks. They note further in, brightening clouds, again, solar geoengineering, is one of several ideas to push solar energy back into space. In other words, make sure some of that sunlight doesn't hit us, doesn't reach the planet. They just reflect it right back, right? They say it's sometimes called solar radiation modification, solar geoengineering, or climate intervention. So if you hear anybody say solar radiation modification, solar geoengineering, or climate intervention, know what they are referring to. They're referring to, again, to having this Mr. Burns's type thing and like The Simpsons where they want to put something up to block sunlight from hitting the planet. Something that was regarded as utterly criminally insane in the past is now regarded as, hey, plausible solutions to the crisis they've manufactured. But New York Times notes that compared with other options, such as injecting aerosols into the stratosphere, again, one of the things that Bill Gates is promoting, for example, they say marine cloud brightening, the one that they're promoting, would be localized and use relatively benign sea salt aerosols as opposed to other chemicals, but with the same effect, of course, of reducing sunlight. They note further in, and yet the idea of interfering with nature is so contentious, organizers of Tuesday's test kept the details tightly held. They're keeping it a secret. They're trying to keep it hidden. And they note that concerned that critics would try to stop them. Although the Biden administration is funding research into different climate interventions, including marine cloud brightening, the White House distanced itself from the California study, the one that they're promoting here, sending a statement to the New York Times that read, quote, "The U.S. government is not involved in the solar radiation modification SRM experiments taking place in Alameda, California, or anywhere else." Wild stuff, folks. Wild stuff. Now remember, oftentimes when you hear them doing these kinds of things, it sounds too crazy to believe, oftentimes at first. But you have a lot of individuals who are in fact moving it forward. In a previous episode, I went over many of the different types of solar geoengineering that are currently being researched and some of the tests that are taking place. There are in fact very large-scale programs being promoted by very large organizations trying to do this. The World Economic Forum, as I noted in a previous episode, has a program where they want to launch into space a giant, basically, bag that will reflect some of the sunlight back away from the Earth in space using this giant, again, it looks like a giant plastic bag. They're trying to do that. The Bill Gates program that they're trying to promote is the one regarding, of course, injecting aerosols directly into the stratosphere. This program, for example, is looking to inject aerosols just from the ground, again, using what they call sea salt to do it, right? But they claim it's just that, using aerosols and that. There are a lot of programs like this. The concern is that although it sounds insane, although it sounds like stuff that's too far out, not only are there people doing it, but again, even though the Biden administration is trying to distance itself from the studies, the administration is in fact funding some of the research. And as you can see here, there are programs being carried out to test it. They are in fact researching it. We also noted previously that in Mexico, there were groups trying to test this, and the Mexican government actually shut it down, right? Even they regard this as just too crazy to be going on. Now, speaking of crazy, Antifa, the radical brown shirts, the individuals who work on political violence, trying to shut down the free speech and expression of others. Very much like the Nazis and their brown shirts, or Mussolini and his, was it the black shirts? The same exact thing. And these, little agents of the governments trying to go out and shut down political dissent. They went to Ireland recently, and they ran into the Irish, so to speak. Antifa recently tried causing trouble in Ireland, where people were protesting against mass illegal immigration. And the Irish people were not having it, because guess what? These things don't work for the Irish. When you talk about historical persecution, the Irish will say, yes, I was historically persecuted by Britain, and my people were enslaved by the Ottomans and so on. The Irish don't work with these narratives, let's put it that way. Not only that, but they're known to fight back. And the Irish protesters ended up standing their ground against Antifa. The Antifa members were, let's say, apprehended and then forced out of the area forcefully. And during the process, these Antifa brown shirts, they dropped their phones. And when they dropped the phones, people, of course, the protesters wanted to make sure that Antifa weren't like recording them so they could, launch their crony hit pieces on them or whatever else and target their houses or families. They go on their phones and they start looking at the details of what these Antifa guys had, and they found something very interesting. This is according to one of the local media there. It says, some of the protesters dropped their mobile phones unlocked at the scene, along with other belongings such as driver's licenses and UK identification. They're from the United Kingdom. They came all the way there to Ireland to cause more trouble. Sounds familiar? It's because the Irish have been dealing with that for a long time. Now, these people from the UK, it says the protesters, they reviewed the content of the phones of the Antifa members to delete any invasive content that had been recorded on one phone, which seems to belong to a mainstream journalist. They're alleging that the individual who tried to attack them, this masked, hooded brown shirt, would appear, it seems, to be a journalist in one of the big corporate media. And they note as well, it would appear to show a concerning level of cooperation between various media sources, NGO workers, non-governmental organizations, and prominent Antifa operatives both in Ireland and the UK. In other words, they found on these phones evidence that the big corporate media, the ones that seem to be trying to shut down their competitors, the ones that seem to be trying to push these narratives, that the journalists, quote unquote, working for these outlets are also activists on the side, manufacturing news, it seems. You might remember there were previous incidents like this. For example, with CNN journalists found to be joining the protests and on the ground carrying out their operations while at the same time trying to act like they were just people like part of the story, right? They weren't journalists, they were just there somehow. They've also been cases where it's like college professors and so on, and even cases where there's been suspected like people tied to government officials. For example, family members and so on. These individuals are joining these brown shirt operations to go and attack, beat down, and shut down anybody who thinks differently than they do. And they found as well this concerning tie of just international collaboration with Antifa, NGO workers, that these non-governmental organizations, which are doing many things. There are NGOs helping facilitate mass illegal migration. There are NGOs interfering with politics. There are NGOs working as the sidearms funded by governments in many instances to do the things that government agencies cannot do, whether it's in the United States or in Europe or elsewhere. And so we have this kind of third column, so to speak, within the system that is acting in a way that is funded by government, that is, and remember, in the UK as well, a lot of the media is government funded, and in most of Europe. Government funded in some instances, promoted by these things, and of course using the narrative structures and powers they have to attack their enemies while again trying to promote their own narratives. They're finding that these operatives on the ground carrying out political violence, which is terrorist by definition, do seem to be part of that system. And notes as well The videos of the phone's content widely circulated on social media. I won't show it to you because of privacy and legal reasons. They say it seems possibly to hold a vast quantity of insider information on the far left in Ireland. And notably, again, based on this and based on other reporting we've seen in the United States, it seems that the Antifa organization operates in the same ways no matter which country they're in. And of course, you have a lot of groups trying to cover up the whole thing, to pretend it's all fake. And it makes you wonder, if there's journalist part of it, is it being covered up by the journalists who are members of it? I should note as well that Antifa would have the same experience they had in Ireland anywhere else in the world were it not for police protection, because in many instances, it's a local government that protects Antifa. They make it so people can't fight back. And if there's violence, they tend to arrest the people who attacked them, but not the Antifa members, and you have to ask why that is. Anytime Antifa goes without government protection, they get their faces stomped in. They're like the soy jacks of the media and so on. These people are like some of the weakest people on the face of the planet. And anytime they go out and get their faces stomped in, of course, the government of all organizations has to go in and protect them while they claim to be anarcho-communists and so on. But look, on the other side, speaking of NGOs, government-funded NGOs, as I mentioned, are being found with links to NATO. They're being accused of interfering with local elections throughout Europe. Now, I'll be talking about this and how wearing jeans is now supposedly a threat to global warming. All of this after a quick word from our sponsor, so don't go anywhere.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Hey, welcome back. NGOs are being accused of interfering in elections in Europe. In fact, these are government-funded NGOs with links to NATO, and they're being accused of interfering with local elections throughout the area. Look, on Substack, they're saying this is a great report. It says, last week, Public reported that European politicians are waging a disinformation campaign smearing their political opponents as linked to Russia. These are Russian agents. They must be shut down. Does it sound familiar? Well, that's the same thing the politicians in this country tried doing to Donald Trump. Now, the same thing now happening in Europe, and they say the current effort appears related to a disinformation operation by the French military, they claim. They say in February, French military officials claimed that websites were promoting an anti-French narrative. If only we went against websites promoting anti-American narratives. But regardless, they say in February, and now Western government officials have made accusations against their political enemies, but made no arrests and announced no prosecutions, which likely means they do not have any evidence of criminal activity, because presumably they would have actually done something had that existed. They say, as such, government and military intelligence agencies are engaging in essentially political activities unrelated to national security and thus illegal. Now, Public has learned that both NATO-funded and government-funded NGOs are working with government bodies to interfere in German elections. And it says, their influence operation aims to keep Germany in line with American foreign policy objectives and undermine the European peace movement. Now, it says that the evidence suggests that European intelligence agencies and NATO are breaking domestic European Union laws against foreign election interference. It says the EU, the European Union, prohibits elected officials and politicians from using military intelligence and security agencies to advance political and electoral means. But again, this is kind of the global thing we're seeing happen right now. Government normally cannot do these things directly, as it notes. In Europe, for example, security agencies, intelligence agencies, and so on, they can't interfere with the elections. It's illegal. They can't do it. Same thing in the United States. The federal government cannot get involved in many things taking place on the ground. The Constitution prohibits them from doing it. And so what we're seeing happening is this. These government agencies are financing, giving money, taxpayer money, to third-party organizations. In many instances, these are non-governmental organizations. I'd question how non-governmental they are if they're funded and operated essentially as extensions of the government, but regardless. These NGOs, then, despite being government-funded, can do the things on behalf of government that it cannot do legally otherwise. And what these NGOs are doing is manufacturing false narratives, facilitating illegal mass migration, buying up data, selling data, and so on, working as the intermediaries, serving the things that government officials would like to do, of particular political parties and so on, but bypassing the laws that would otherwise restrict the government from doing these things directly. The NGOs have become like the third column to do this. As we just mentioned, even Antifa had tied to the NGOs. Even, for example, mass illegal migration has ties to the NGOs. And now we see election interference tied with NGOs. And again, just to emphasize another layer of this, we see the same thing being done in the migrant crisis, as I was just mentioning, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well. The operations of illegal mass migration are being carried out through government agreements with the United Nations, whether it's the US or Europe or otherwise. It's again the Global Compact for Migration they're part of. And it's a compact which allowed them to bypass constitutional regulations on creating international treaties, which you need a 2/3 vote from Congress to do. So it's questionably legal in the United States for them to even be part of this, but regardless. They take our taxpayer money, they give it to the United Nations, and they give it to the NGOs. And the United Nations and NGOs run the operations with coordination from the federal government, which lets them do things they can't do otherwise legally. A lot of the ground operations are being run by NGOs, whether it's the facilitation of mass migration through Latin America, or even the transport of these illegal migrants and so on buses throughout the country. It's the NGOs doing this. But they're getting financed, and again, they're part of the operations of the federal government, part of this international agreement. And it's the exact same thing in Europe, where, for example, all those boats going from Africa to Italy and so on, right? The big boats transporting all the illegals, those are just run by NGOs as part of this exact same agreement. And again, it seems to be the case that these, I would call them radical leftists who have seized the levers of power in many countries, they're finding that they can bypass laws by using NGOs as their agents. They're using the NGOs as their agents, whether it's that, whether it's other agendas, whether it's attacking political enemies on the ground, or whether it's rigging elections, as we see happening right now in Europe according to this. Now, folks, in other news, forget about farting cows or drinking coffee or breathing, because we, of course, exhale CO2. Now there's a new cause of climate change. They just released the next one. And people who claim to be researchers are saying that doing this just once is the equivalent of driving a car over 6 miles. It turns out, folks, that wearing jeans is now a cause of climate change. Daily Mail said, they might be an essential piece of everyday clothing, but scientists now say that even a simple pair of jeans could be bad for the environment. Wearing a pair of fast fashion jeans just once creates 2.5 kilograms of CO2, the equivalent of driving a petrol car 6.4 miles. They say that scientists from Guangdong University in China, by the way, of technology analyzed the life cycle of a pair of Levi's jeans from growing the cotton to their eventual disposal. And it says that they found that some jeans were worn only 7 times, earning them the classification of fast fashion, and produced 11 times more CO2 than jeans worn more often. Dr. Ya Zhou, the study's lead author, says this, quote, "The humble wardrobe staple, a pair of jeans, has a significant impact on the environment." Now look, we know how good the CCP is on the environment. And frankly, any research organization in China is going to have ties to the CCP. There's no exception to it. So I don't know, frankly, why they're even promoting this study from a bunch of like crony communists in China. We know the CCP controls a lot of the green energy market as well. Thanks, and also can really, right, because they can push policies that restrict production outside of China. They don't have to follow these things in China. When the rest of the world agrees on the Paris Climate Accord, it makes restrictions on development in Europe and in the United States and other countries. It makes us cut back on production and ruin our economies. But it has no restrictions on China, the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, it is in their interest to claim that our products are causes of the problem so they can restrict our industries and then take us over in the markets. Of course they are behind this. Not only that, but they control the rare earth minerals that are essential to the creation of these things. They control the mines that are, again, creating the parts needed for these things, solar panels or whatever else. They're stealing technology, manufacturing things using our stolen technology, and then undercutting our own businesses, even in government contracts in the United States. One example of this is the wind turbines. China stole that technology from America and then wins bids manufacturing the things they stole from us, oftentimes even against some of the companies they stole it from in the first place, and get government money to build them. Of course the CCP is promoting this. But back to the point of jeans. This ties into something else. Do you remember in a recent episode where I went over this whole governor agreement where they want to reduce the consumption of meat, where they want to reduce consumerism, they want to make it so there's less options in stores? Do you all remember when we were talking about this? We were saying they want to reduce the number of options. I showed you their actual reports saying this. They stated this intent. They want to make it so that meat becomes a luxury, a rare luxury, let's say. They want to make it more expensive. And so they need to reduce the consumption of meat. How do you reduce the consumption of meat? Remember, New York and other major cities, they are directly involved in this program. They're signed on to this program. They want to reduce the consumption of meat. They also want to reduce the amount you can fly airplanes. They want to reduce the amount that you drive. And they want to reduce the number of options you have when you go to buy clothes every year. If you remember, there was a viral report going around where a lot of media were saying the World Economic Forum wants you to have a uniform. There were some technical errors with that narrative, but the basis of it was this. They want to reduce the amount of clothes you purchase every year. And as part of that program, they want to reduce the amount of options you have from companies that manufacture these types of products. Now, take that into account with what's been coming out of Guangdong in China, where they're claiming jeans are a cause of climate change. What is the natural presumption with this? Well, maybe we should buy less jeans. Maybe we should make it so that people wear them more than 7 times, which was the narrative being promoted from China, claiming to be the cause of climate change, that people don't wear their clothes enough. What is the possible outcome of this? Well, maybe buy less clothes and wear your clothes more, which means what? You do exactly what that government agreement globally says we should do. It means it's fitting in with that narrative. It means it's lining up with that agenda. It means this is exactly what they said they wanted to do, and now they're creating a fake scientific basis on which to build that platform. At least in my opinion, that's what they're doing. Now look, soon also you may just have to drive an electric car. They're not very popular right now. People are not buying them. They're just decaying in car lots and so on because people do not want them. And so rather than try to change the market and build something else that people actually do want, the Biden administration is taking another route. They're trying to make it so you have no choice. Because folks, they're talking about how wearing a pair of jeans can cause climate change and it's equal to driving a car. But speaking of driving a car, folks, you might not have a choice but to get an electric vehicle very soon. Because the Biden administration has a new mandate out to eliminate your freedom to make a choice on this. USA Today says that Biden, however, also is not being upfront with the public about what his new Environmental Protection Agency rule actually means. It says the headline announcing the EPA Environmental Protection Agency mandate last month proclaims, quote, Biden-Harris administration finalizes strongest ever pollution standard for cars that positions U.S. companies and workers to lead the clean vehicle future, protect public health, address the climate crisis, save drivers money. Well, geez, I mean, who doesn't want to protect workers and save money and, have better health? Geez, that sounds fantastic. But what does it mean in practice? That's the question. It notes it as the most bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo, right? The meaning is less than clear. It says, they'll translate it for us. Quote, if you like your current gas-powered car, SUV, or truck, too bad, because very soon you may not be able to have it. They say the final rule, which begins in earnest in 2027, just a few years away, by the way, right? That's only 3 years away, folks. It demands that automakers quickly amp up production of electric vehicles by 2032, the emissions standard. It dictates that roughly 70% of new vehicle sales have to be battery-powered electric or hybrids. I would question. You can mandate production. You can mandate that car companies have to have 70% of their vehicles be, hybrids or electric cars, right? Technically, you can mandate that. But how do you mandate purchases? How do you mandate new vehicle sales? How do you force a company to sell, 70% of new vehicles, and those vehicles they sell have to be of one type? Now, that hypothetically means that only 30% of us are going to be able to buy gas-powered cars. How do they do that? Well, the idea is that they mess with the pricing. They're going to have to make gas-powered cars only for the elites, only for the wealthy people, probably the ones promoting all these stupid narratives in the first place. The people have no problem driving, flying their private jets to all corners of the earth while telling us we should fly less. The people eating their steak and lobster telling us to eat less meat. The people who live these extravagant lifestyles trying to preach to us about how we should live more like humbly or something like that. It's those types. They want to make it, right? So that basically most people cannot afford these other types of cars, that it's too difficult to get. Because that's the only way you can mandate a purchase, right, percentage. And they want to have for the other 70% of us electric cars or hybrids. And note that for comparison, EVs, electric vehicles, made up just under 8% of new car sales last year. So only about 8% of people who bought new cars wanted these EVs. How do you make everybody else want them? Well, that's the big question, right? They say if automakers don't fall in line, they risk hefty fines. While the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, doesn't specifically call for EVs, the only way automakers could reach the new targets is with a major uptick in that technology. They have to reduce the number of cars available so that you have no choice but to buy the ones they say that you have to buy. And remember, they're doing that across the board because that's the whole idea of reducing the number of options we have when we go to buy new things, whether it's clothes or cars or anything else. Now, of course, this mandate only needs to be in place because of electric vehicles. They can't survive in a normal economy. People do not want them. And what do you do when someone doesn't want something? Normally in a healthy economy, you let it fail. You let it fail until you find something people do want, and then once people actually do want it, it succeeds. That's how a healthy, normal, capitalist system functions. But unfortunately, even though people criticize it, we're not practicing true capitalism. We are practicing crony capitalism. It is fake capitalism. It is not real. It is socialist intervention masquerading as capitalism. And ironically, when people criticize the things wrong with it, oftentimes they're criticizing these socialist interventionist policies that are messing the whole thing up. But back to this, Epoch Times says, a little more than half of all Ford dealers have opted to sell electric vehicles in 2024, down from roughly 2/3 that expressed a willingness to do so at the same time last year, which comes as EV enthusiasm, electric vehicle, appears to be cooling. In other words, even the places that sell cars, they don't want to sell electric vehicles because they sit on the lots, people don't buy them, and they lose money. So rather than let the whole thing die, what are they doing? They're mandating that you have to buy the thing that you don't want. Hot Air says this. They say the problem with electric vehicles isn't really cost, although that is one of the important variables. It is more fundamental than that. EVs, electric vehicles, they're a perfect fit for a slice of the market, and frankly would make a great second car for a lot of people who live in suburban areas. They are slick, fun, and at least Teslas are impressive technologically and pleasant to drive. They are not practical for people who need flexible, reliable transportation for moderate to long distances, and they certainly don't work for people without the ability to charge nightly in a garage. Me, for example, I live in New Jersey. I live in an apartment. I could not charge an electric vehicle. I had to park on the street. There's no place to plug it in at. I could not have one. It wouldn't work for me. And so there are a lot of people like me, frankly. It notes they are a niche product right now. The market has spoken on this matter. The average car buyer does not want an EV. And even people, right, they don't even want to rent them. Even for rentals, people don't want them. Even for just fun driving, in other words, people don't want them because they're too much hassle. They say, ask Hertz about that. They're losing their shirt on their Tesla fleet, and the CEO just got booted for going all in on Teslas. They're a novelty, not a staple. People don't want them. They're not reliable. They're too much hassle. They're fun to drive maybe, and maybe cheap as like a sidecar, but they're not going to work to replace what we need. And look, of course, this is all part of a bigger agenda. And there's now legal pushback against Biden policies to try to force people to reduce emissions. Already there are lawsuits challenging this. Just the News said a group of attorneys general in 21 states is suing the Biden administration over new highway emissions rules. And notes this. The new rule by the Federal Highway Administration and the U.S. Department of Transportation, which goes into effect on January 8th, would require transportation departments in states with national highway systems mileage to create targets for carbon dioxide reduction and send results to the federal agencies. I'd call that, again, just agency creep. I'd call that, for example, the administrative state. I'd call that agencies getting into business they shouldn't be in. But regardless, the states seem to agree with me. It says the state's complaint filed in the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Kentucky, again, 21 AGs on this, so it's not just Kentucky, but regardless, it argues the federal agencies don't have the authority granted by Congress to require states to reduce emissions. They're arguing, again, that you need Congress to pass this. It can't just be mandated by the administrative state, by agencies that can try to dictate things without going through congressional process, that they can't just bypass the normal democratic process and force their tyrannical laws on the nation. And again, we'll see if that holds up because that's what's going to be challenged right now. Given it's going to be a few years probably, I would say if it goes to the current Supreme Court, remember the current Supreme Court generally has ruled against the pseudo-authority of the administrative state, the ability of different government agencies to essentially rule by decree, where they create rules and things like that, rather than laws, because laws have to go through Congress. They bypass the legislative process to do whatever the heck they want, and this is questionably legal. We'll see where that goes, folks. But of course, there are other issues the Biden administration is pushing, and a group of mainly Democrat lawmakers as well, they're trying to do some other things. Look, I've mentioned some of this before, but it's still being pushed. They want to roll out policies to monitor your car, allegedly to make you unable to speed. How do they make you not speed? They have to surveil you. They have to watch where you're driving, and they have to watch exactly where you're at and know the speed limit of exactly where you're at, and then ticket you if you go over the speed limit in exactly where you're at, or make it so that your car can override you and not go over the speed limit. They're trying to artificially prevent people from speeding. Now, look, the Federalist says the expression, as goes California, so goes the nation, right? Thankfully isn't always true, much to the chagrin of sidewalk excrement aficionados and fans of dysfunction in general. Because they say when it comes to cars, California's problem for this stuff, right? They say basically the size of the state plus the structure of the automotive industry means that rather than producing vehicles that comply with California laws just for Californians to purchase, automakers instead have to sell those vehicles nationwide. And so if California, for example, begins mandating certain standards on cars, even though it's a California law, I should note this is happening at both the state and federal level, right? The federal government's trying to do this as well. But at the state level in California, they're trying to make it so that cars just can't go that fast anymore. What's going to happen? Well, look, most automakers are not going to make the California version of their cars, right? They're probably not going to make the California specific version unless they put like speed limiters on just for California, like restricting like an automatic rifle or something like that, right? They're calling them assault vehicles now, by the way. I'm not even joking. So these assault vehicles capable of driving over 65 miles per hour. Maybe these vehicles will be only allowed in California, where again they have limits on it. And the assault vehicles that go over 65, they'll be for the rest of the dangerous world, right? The problem is, though, California is such a big state that if they make laws restricting this, a lot of car manufacturers are just going to make that the standard everywhere, or other states are going to follow in their footsteps. They know that that's why the latest nuttery from one of the commissars of California matters not just to the Golden State, but to the other 49 states, particularly the states that aren't ruled by insane zealots. They say, if enacted and given how the state operates, it will most likely pass. The latest additions to Senator Scott Wiener's Safer California Streets package will require all new vehicles to be equipped with a governor that prevents drivers from going faster than 10 miles above the posted speed limit. They can get rid of those assault vehicles now, folks. Now, look, this is also an agenda being pushed at the federal level. And remember, we discussed the broader issue with these agendas before. The bigger issue, in my opinion, is that if you want to track speed limits, it also requires tools and technologies for that. How do they know what the posted speed limit is of where your car is driving? How does your car know that? It means you will have to have a type of GPS, and the type of GPS will have to be connected to some kind of government-regulated system that tracks the posted speed limit, which means they will know exactly where you're at, which means you have to have government-regulated technology in your vehicle, and which means that you lose your privacy when you're in your vehicle. You no longer control it. It is regulated, controlled, and given to you by the government. And along with these capabilities to control your vehicle in real time as well, right? They can know exactly what your car is doing, and they even have proposals maybe to shut down your vehicle if you try to go over that. Now, folks, before we jump into questions, today is Tuesday, so the full episode is available for all of you watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Rumble, so don't go anywhere. But if you've enjoyed this discussion and would like to ask questions, please consider joining us on Epoch TV. It's your support, again, that helps me do the work I'm doing and helps others like me do the work we're doing. The link to join us on EpochTV.com is in the description below, and I hope to see you there. But let's jump into some questions, folks. Let's see here. All right, one sec. Okay. First question from Japan Dial That Jazz. You're saying, this is already happening where I live. They have been spraying heavy metals into the atmosphere for some time, and it leads to constant rain and very little sun. Absolutely insane. I know people talk about, I forget what the word they use for it, like chemtrails and stuff like that. And everyone's like, oh, that's crazy. I can't say whether they actually do that. I do know there's regulations on chemtrails, for example, trying to regulate these things. I do know as well that in China, the Chinese Communist Party does in fact use, rockets, for example, tipped with certain chemical compositions to force rain and things like that. In China, they do stuff like this. Absolutely, the technology for this does in fact exist. We do know now that they're also using these types of technologies, trying to inject clouds with different types of chemicals and aerosols. We do know there's tests taking place to inject the stratosphere with chemicals. So without a doubt, there are regulations, there are programs internationally, and there are experiments, including government-funded experiments, doing these types of things. You can do what you will with that information and draw your conclusions on it, but it's no longer conspiracy. They are, in fact, doing these things. The reasoning for why they're doing it is maybe where people have different opinions. Some people believe that, well, it's part of this crazy idea that they think they're fighting global warming. Some think it might be just about money. Some think it might be about actually affecting us with dangerous chemicals in different ways. I can say, I know there's an unpublished book by an individual named Joseph Douglas. I cite his works often because he wrote one of the best books on drug warfare and how the Chinese Communist Party under Mao Zedong started the international drug trade, right? What we're watching right now with fentanyl and so on. Again, there wasn't fentanyl at the time of Marx, but he started the system for the drug trade, especially heroin and cocaine. But he also wrote, before his death, an unpublished book, unfortunately, that actually went over the Soviet programs of using chemicals and the experiments they did on them to alter people, including, for example, feminizing men, including, for example, inducing, it sounds crazy, but homosexuality. And there have been some tests showing, for example, transgender effects of certain chemicals on, yes, frogs, fish, and other creatures in rivers and oceans and so on. I've done episodes on this before talking about, and they call it endocrine disruptors. These things are real. And there were, in fact, Soviet experiments finding out and researching how they could use these chemicals to control populations. So there is some legitimacy to it, even though it is written off oftentimes as just insane conspiracy theory. There have, in fact, been experiments, especially under the Soviet Union, to use chemicals as forms of social control, ways of weakening men especially, ways of making it so men don't fight back and defend their countries. This is, in fact, something that they have done. I'm not saying they're doing this on a broad scale these days, but we can say credibly that there have been experiments on this with that particular agenda for it, social control. And we can say that regardless of whether it's intentional or not, there are chemicals in drinking water and other things like that in major waterways that have these effects as well. You could blame it on poor water filtration, blame it on, for example, birth control and so on, which is putting a lot of female hormones in water. You could blame it on the proliferation of endocrine disruptors, including from raw sewage and stuff like that, and treated sewage water, that have scientifically proven been having this effect on fish and frogs and other things. It is unfortunately real. Again, the intent is what we can debate, but we can, without a doubt, say that it is real. Philip Chambers, you're saying, no doubt there is grant money involved here, money that would be lost if these experiments were not conducted. Yeah, the Biden administration is also financing it. Again, solar geoengineering. The federal government actually has money dedicated to running some of these experiments. The Biden administration, on the particular case New York Times mentioned, denied that they were in any way involved with that. But again, federal government money is being used on similar experiments. That was a few months ago, by the way, that they passed that. You're saying, by now we should all know that what goes up comes down. When it rains salt water onto our crops somewhere and kills out a food source, they will blame that on climate change as well. Philip, that's a great point, because I could see them doing that. Oh no, the crops are dying. It must be climate change. Oh no, there's salination of crops. What does that cause, by the way? It'll cause deserts to move in. If you understand the nature of oceans and deserts, right? You know, Hawaii has deserts. Most islands have deserts. It's because the salt water from the ocean goes onto certain plots of land, and because they salt the land, the soil, nothing can grow in it. You get deserts. What happens if you spray salt, right, ocean salt, into the stratosphere or clouds, and that rains down on certain areas? Maybe, for example, even the rain from clouds could have higher salt density if you're not careful. What happens then when that goes down and then, you know, salts the land? When in ancient empires, when they destroyed civilizations and they salted the land, it was to make it so nothing could ever grow there again. They used that as a form of warfare. And here you have insane zealots, right? These climate change cultists trying to do this across the world, it seems, right? I don't think they fully understand the possible outcomes of what they're doing. I don't think they're taking into full account the detrimental side effects the things they're doing could actually have if they're not careful. Again, one of the reasons why this is so dangerous, and Philip, yeah, it's a great point. What happens to the crops if you increase the salt in rain clouds and it rains down on crops and so on? Crash Bandit, you're saying, could we consider that tech to be a weather weapon? I thought we passed international laws preventing weather weapon development. Well, this is one of the technicalities that exists not just on solar geoengineering, weather modification technologies, right? Solar geoengineering, whatever they want to call it, they have a lot of names for it. Carbon capture facilities, anything they're doing to fight climate change that involves altering the physical environment. You can weaponize these things, without a doubt. You know, I'd say that if there was a hostile country and they wanted to destroy the crops in America, what better way than to, again, inject rain clouds with more salt to destroy the crops, right? To salt the land, make it so nothing can grow there, to cause us to have deserts. Why not, right? They can oftentimes get around these types of things by not calling it weapons programs. I'm not saying this is a weapons program, but I am saying this is a known method for getting around these things. This was told to me years ago before it was controversial, that most countries on Earth have biological warfare programs, even though most countries are part of the biowarfare agreements, things that would restrict the development of bioweapons, right? Weaponized viruses and so on. The way they get around that is they don't call it bioweapons development. They call it virus research. They call it vaccine research. They call it things like these P3 and P4 labs. They don't call it biological weapons. That's how they get around the regulations. The irony is that the process of creating dangerous new pathogens, whether you're doing it for vaccine research or for weaponized biowarfare, it is the exact same process. Because on both sides of it, you have to take existing viruses and alter them in certain ways to make them able to infect humans. The very nature of having humanized mice, the very nature of gain-of-function research, the very nature of the things that are being carried out using government funding from the US and other countries in many regards, being carried out in Chinese laboratories that might have led to COVID. These things, even though they say it's for other purposes, do, by definition, resemble bioweapons. That is what a bioweapon is. And they just call it something different to get around the regulations. That's the only difference, right? It's not a bioweapon. We're just researching new vaccines. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Researching some new vaccines. It's not a bioweapon. That is not a gun. That is a lead dispenser to inject the land with lead. You know what I mean? You can just redefine things and say the purpose is something else, officer. This is what they're doing, essentially. Let's see. California gal, you're saying, but will they restrict clothes made in China? California gal, great question. Yeah, probably not, right? Because the CCP can say whatever they want. Maybe they can make international regulations on Levi's and so on. Because why is it the Chinese laboratory, or so the Chinese scientists, they're calling out one particular American brand rather than, jeans in general? They're calling it Levi's instead of jeans, right? Maybe they're going after a particular company they're competing with, hypothetically speaking. That would make sense. And yeah, great point. I'm pointing that out. Michael Kolovsky is saying, is there a booster available that will render our genes safe and effective again? Yeah. Maybe you need like 5 or 6 of them. Maybe you need one every year for that matter. Maybe it'll start working if we just keep on doing it, even though it fails the first 50 times. This seems to be the new way of doing things. It failed the first time, but you just didn't do it enough. It reminds me actually of during the famines in China under Mao Zedong, when different provinces of China were having serious stuff. They were having mass starvation. Tens of millions of people were dying. Mao Zedong, rather than be like, hey, communism isn't working, right? Rather than just say, hey, seems that communism doesn't work. When we try it, it causes mass economic failure, famine, and death. Rather than just say that, they said, no, it doesn't work because you don't believe in it enough. You don't believe in communism enough for it to work. It's not working because it doesn't work. It's not working because the people don't believe in it, right? And so the solution was to go deeper into the cause of the problem rather than get rid of the cause of the problem. It makes me think of a lot of things we're watching right now. It didn't work not because it doesn't work. It didn't work because too many people refused to get it. For the vaccines to work, everybody has to get them. Otherwise, they don't work because obviously it'll start protecting you from the virus, but only if everybody gets it so that they don't infect you with the virus because you're somehow protected if you get it. Like, what is the logic here? You know what I mean? Again, it's the same narrative they have for communism in general, that communism will only work if every country on the face of the earth practices it. But you have to all practice it before it works. You all have to get the vaccine for the vaccines to start working, even though they don't work right now and we can see them not working. But just get it and then magically it'll start working, right? You just have to believe in it enough for it to work. Wild stuff, folks. It's the same narratives over and over and over again. Don't believe your lying eyes. Don't trust your own logic. That's the ongoing narrative. Just trust the science, and then magically, if you just have enough faith in communism, maybe one day it'll start working. That's the narrative, piece by piece, agenda by agenda, part by part, where they try to make excuses for the fact that their system is an utter failure. It does not work. All right, folks, that said, before we go, let me show you a trailer of my documentary, The Final War, talking about the Chinese Communist Party, the way it works, and the various things that it does. I did a great documentary on it. If you haven't seen it yet, it's called The Final War, talking about the CCP's agendas against the United States. It's very important to know this. Also, as I've been mentioning, I'm going to have a documentary very soon as well coming out on the border crisis. I will have hopefully an update very soon on the release date. I just got the final version of it, which is in review right now. And so updates on that soon. That said, folks, thank you so much for being here. Please share this episode, help us get the word out. And as always, again, join us tomorrow. Please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.
The greatest threat facing the United States is the CCP.
The Epoch Times investigation team had studied the CCP for years, but what we uncovered was yielding evidence beyond our imagination.
With Chairman Mao, with the Prime Minister, our talks have been characterized by frankness.
The Clinton administration said, oh, don't worry about it. This will be a poison pill for China. China's strategic goal is to make sure that the U.S. has 4 enemies, and one of them must be a terrorist group.
We are giving of our life's blood so that the Chinese Communist Party can survive and thrive.